Hello and welcome to Editing Workshop. I already did some work here, but then my computer crashed and lost all of my progress, which we love, but that's totally fine. So let's get into it. So this is our opening really bad draft, all this bottom part here. We have this opening dialogue line right here. Now, in general, you don't want to open with a dialogue line. The issue with opening with a dialogue line is that, just like a movie, right, we have that opening scene, that opening context that goes out. If you open with a dialogue line, your reader has nothing to picture. So we don't know who our characters are, we don't know anything about the scene, like it really just is this dialogue line just floating in space. So we have to create all of this, establishing of context and scene from scratch just at the beginning. So now we're going to have to create an opening line here. So what I already did, which you didn't see, but we talked about opening line. So opening line, you need to set the tone, you need to set the character, setting, opening context, all of this as much as humanly possible. So I wrote this opening line, Raoul had just woken up and he was already tired. That gives us an idea of character, right, is that Raoul is just this tired, sad little man. And our second line is he climbed the stairs to the kitchen one by one like a mountain. Now this establishes several things. It's funny because the first thing he has to do after waking up when he's tired is to climb up these stairs, so we assume he lives in a basement or something. And then the second question that we were going to go into was how do we link this dialogue line into all of this opening context that we just were creating. So Karina is in the kitchen when Raoul had just woken up, and she's making omelets. So he's like exhausted and she's up there, already tossing eggs around and stuff like that. A very different character to Raoul. We get the sense that maybe she's more type A, Raoul is more just exhausted. And then to prompt where are you going, Raoul has to do something, so drearily. Now you're going to notice something. All of these adverbs are coming out. In general, you'll notice that you have to rely a lot on these adverbs to imply tone, and we want to get rid of that as soon as possible. So once we do more editing, we're going to cut out all these adverbs. It helps to mark them. So the more we write, the more a little scene is coming into play here. So right now this dialogue line is just kind of floating. It has nothing to anchor it. If we move this line up here, then we have an anchor point. Karina tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder. This implies a couple things about Karina. It implies that she's kind of this, shallow blonde, which I'm not really too fond of. And it's a little bit, sexist when your only female character is just this shallow blonde. So just always be aware of the tropes that you're putting into these characters as we go into the story. So we already know that we need to subvert somehow this shallow blonde stereotype, or at least make her a more interesting shallow blonde. So next dialogue line is I'm going to school, Raoul hissed. Now, we all know already, hissing, not the best, implies a very severe tone. Raoul is pretty apathetic, so hissing just doesn't even make sense in the context, and you really don't want to rely on those alternative words for said. Be more interesting. Don't try and force it to be more interesting. You just have to figure out how to be more interesting. If it's not interesting, then you gotta be more interesting, and we're gonna learn how to do that today. First of all, this is not how people talk. Where are you going? I'm going to school. That's just not how people talk. But you said you were going to go to the mall with me. That's not how people talk in real life. So we need to be aware of that. We need to say it out loud. For example, what do you say in real life? Probably just, get this, school, Raoul said. And that's a much more dialogue, realistic dialogue that you might have in character. And then having Karina put more effort into her dialogue, like her sentences, than Raul, who just says one word, already makes a lot more sense based off of the information that we've been getting. So, as you'll notice, every single dialogue line we want to be consistent with the character of Karina. Every single one of Raul's dialogue lines we want to be consistent with him. So everything has to be intentional. You have to be aware of what each of these words implies about your character and how you're going to be doing it. So let's think about what we can do for Karina. Instead of Karina whining, which is just kind of like she's 3, what do people actually say when something like that happens? And then this is where you can get interesting. So people in real life might say them all, but we want this to feel specific. We want our details in our story to feel like a real place. So instead of the mall, what interesting store can we give it? Maybe like Marshall's. Marshall's, that implies something about Karina. But we could also do something completely unconventional, like 7-Eleven. And then that's really interesting. Like, what kind of characters wanted to go to 7-Eleven together? That's really weird. The hard part is figuring out what's the perfect amount of interesting, but not so jarring that you get rid of the story. So maybe, what if it's grocery shopping instead? What if we go Albertsons? That implies something different about Karina, right? Instead of Karina wanting to go shopping for clothes or whatever, this implies that they need groceries. And Raul is not really into that. Karina seems to be kind of trapped in this, between the making omelets and the groceries thing, trapped in this traditional femininity. We can sense that Karina is a little bit discontent in her role here. And Raul seems like he's not really aware of that. Or if he is aware, he's trying to avoid it. And so just be aware of all those layers of implications that are going on. That's one of the most important things I can teach you, is the layers of implications to all of these really simple lines. And that's how we can start building off a really interesting story. Alright, so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through, flesh out this dialogue, and just fix all of our sentences. But before I do that, I'm going to show you one more thing, which is that one of the best things to do when you're learning how to edit is to just space out your lines. If you have big chunks of lines, it gets really hard on the eyes, and this helps your lines stand out so much more. Hopefully my laptop won't quit on me, and I'm going to go through and just fix all these. Now you'll notice this next paragraph is all this diatribe about Raul and playing his video game. Right now it's not really doing anything for the story. The easiest thing right now probably would be to delete it, and we can always come back for it. Now, I originally had Raul as Karina's boyfriend, but I think girlfriend-boyfriend's overdone, and based on what we set up before, Raul's maybe a foster kid or something. Some relationship like that will be a lot more interesting. And then we notice that Raul goes to school. Well, for right now, we're not going to worry about any other scenes. We might add them in later. For now, we're just going to worry about the scene with Raul and Karina, and we're just going to expand this little piece we have here. Okay, so let's look at what we talked about. We talked about how to set up all of this tone and context and character. We talked about to make lists of all the implications of your writing so that we understand the implication of every single word in here and every single sentence. We talked about making sure every single sentence is relevant to the story. We talked about understanding character and complicating already existing character relationships. How can we take this one step further? How can we push it? How can we make it a little bit more specific? We talked about making dialogue realistic, and we talked about keeping the scene very controlled for our short story, and that's what you need to know for this first workshop of level 1. And I'll see you later on workshop level 2. We'll go a little bit more into controlling these adverbs and get you up to the next level.